They thought it was just another quiet truck stop along Interstate 40, an easy target. They saw an aging Marine veteran sitting alone at the counter, a few scattered truckers keeping to themselves, and figured it was just another place ripe for the taking. Another stop to expand their criminal empire. What the Road Wolves MC didn't realize was that Marcus Davidson wasn't just any former Marine. He was Force Recon, a man who had spent years dismantling drug cartels across 3 continents. His calm demeanor hid the kind of strategic mind that could turn any battlefield, even a roadside diner, into a war zone. So when 2 Road Wolves members swaggered into Crossroads truck stop, Marcus immediately recognized the signs. The gang was marking new territory. He could have ignored it like everyone else, just another bystander watching as this gang terrorized truck stops across 5 states. But that wasn't who he was. Instead, he chose to stand his ground. And in doing so, he turned a simple truck stop into the front line of a war against one of the region's most dangerous criminal organizations. By the time the dust settled, the Road Wolves would learn a hard lesson about underestimating the wrong man. And the trucking community? It would never be the same again. This is the story of how 2 bikers picked the wrong veteran to intimidate, and how one man's courage inspired an entire community to take back their roads. Before we jump in, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something even bigger waiting for you. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the Crossroads truck stop parking lot. The neon open sign flickered to life as dusk settled in. Inside, Marcus Davidson sat at his usual spot at the counter, reviewing his route maps over his 3rd cup of coffee. 20 years in the military had left him with habits that never faded. Back to the wall. Full view of the entrances. Always aware. Jenny Thompson, the ever-cheerful waitress, approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "Need a refill, Marcus?" He nodded. "Thanks, Jenny. Always tastes better when you make it." She smiled, pouring. "You say that every time." "And I mean it every time." Outside, the peaceful routine shattered. 2 motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their straight pipes deliberately loud, enough to set nerves on edge. Marcus didn't look up from his maps, but he didn't need to. Through the chrome reflection of the coffee machine, he watched them dismount. Leather vests. Road Wolves MC patches. Trouble. Jenny's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "Oh no," she whispered. "Beth warned us about them." Marcus gave her a steady nod. "It's okay, Jenny. Just go about your business." The door chimed. The taller biker stepped in first, graying beard, cold eyes, the kind of man who enjoyed being feared. His vest bore the name Hammer. His younger companion, wiry with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, followed close behind. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Hammer drawled, his voice thick with mockery. "Real nice setup you got here." From the kitchen, Beth Morrison, the truck stop's owner, emerged. Her expression was neutral, but Marcus noticed her right hand sliding beneath the counter. He knew what was there. A baseball bat. "Welcome to Crossroads," she said evenly. "What can I get you gentlemen?" Snake smirked, leaning against the counter. "How about everything in the register, for starters?" Tension settled over the diner. A couple of truckers sat frozen in their booths. A family of 3 stiffened, the father instinctively moving to shield his wife and young daughter. Hammer chuckled, placing a hand on Snake's shoulder. "Easy there, brother. We're just here to talk business." He turned to Beth, voice smooth but laced with menace. "See, this stretch of highways under new management. Road Wolves are expanding, and we're here to discuss your monthly protection fees." Marcus kept his eyes on his maps, but inside, his instincts were firing. He'd seen this move before, both in the Marines and after. Small gangs always started with intimidation. Establish fear. Then reveal their true operations. Beth's voice remained firm. "This is a family establishment. We don't need protection. Hammer's smirk darkened. Everybody needs protection. Bad things happen to businesses that don't understand that. Equipment breaks. Supplies go missing. Customers have accidents. Snake drifted toward the family's table, his fingers brushing over the little girl's chair as he passed. She whimpered, clutching her mother's arm. That's when Marcus spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, but it carried the weight of a man who had spent his life walking the line between order and chaos. The lady said she's not interested. The diner went silent. Hammer turned slowly, finally noticing Marcus for the first time. His lips curled into a sneer. Well, looks like we got ourselves a hero. He stepped closer, towering over Marcus. This ain't your business, old-timer. Marcus lifted his eyes from his maps, locking onto Hammer's gaze. Steady. Unshaken. Not a trace of fear. You just made it my business. Hammer leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. That right? And just who do you think you are? Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from his coffee. Just a guy trying to enjoy his drink, he said evenly. But I've got a pretty good idea who you are. Road Wolves MC, moving up from Texas, trying to establish new territory. You start with intimidation at truck stops and diners, then move on to protection rackets, then drugs. Hammer's eyes narrowed. You seem to know a lot about it. I know enough to tell you you're making a mistake. Snake, the wiry biker with the tattoo winding up his neck, took a step forward, his hand drifting toward his belt. Only mistake being made is by you, old man. Marcus didn't react. Didn't tense. Didn't so much as blink. He simply took another slow sip of his coffee. Two choices, gentlemen, he said, setting the cup down. You can walk out that door, get on your bikes, and find somewhere else to cause trouble. Or, you can try whatever it is you're thinking about trying, and we'll see how that works out for everyone. Something in his voice, the absolute certainty, made Snake hesitate. Hammer studied Marcus more closely now, taking in the military precision of his posture, the deliberate way he controlled his space. You're the one making a mistake, Hammer said, though there was just the slightest waver in his tone. Marcus gave him a small, knowing nod. It is for tonight. Hammer held his gaze a moment longer, then slowly backed away. Come on, Snake, he muttered. We'll finish this conversation another time. The two bikers turned and strode out, mounting their bikes. But before they roared off, Hammer pointed two fingers at his own eyes, then at the diner, a clear warning. The moment the sound of their engines faded, the tension in the diner broke. A father at a nearby table approached Marcus, his face still pale. Thank you, sir. I don't know what would have happened if. Marcus cut him off gently. Nothing was going to happen to your family. Not here. Then he turned to Beth. You might want to call Sheriff Cooper. Let him know the Road Wolves are moving into his territory. Beth nodded, already reaching for the phone. They'll be back, won't they? Marcus exhaled, glancing back down at his maps. Yeah, he said. And next time, they won't come alone. Jenny refilled his coffee, her hand still slightly unsteady. What are we gonna do? Marcus finally looked up at her, his expression calm but resolute. We're gonna show them they picked the wrong truck stop. The wrong community. And definitely, the wrong veteran to mess with. As the night settled in, Marcus remained at his spot at the counter, planning. The Road Wolves would be back, probably the next night, with reinforcements. They had no choice. Letting him stand up to them would make them look weak, and a gang like that couldn't afford weakness. But that was exactly what he was counting on. Sometimes, the best way to handle a threat wasn't to run from it, or even to fight it head-on. It was to draw it out into the open, on your terms. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Truckers he knew. Veterans like him. Men who understood what it meant to stand together. By the time the Road Wolves returned, they wouldn't find just another truck stop. they'd find a line in the sand. And Marcus Davidson wasn't about to let them cross it. Dawn broke over Crossroads truck stop, painting the sky in streaks of amber and gold. Marcus sat at his usual spot, sipping his coffee, watching as familiar faces filtered in. Beth worked the morning shift herself, pouring cup after cup for the growing crowd of truckers. "Never seen it this busy this early," Jenny murmured, tying her apron as she started her shift. Marcus scanned the room. Big Steve Johnson, former Army Ranger turned long-haul trucker, sat near the window, sipping his coffee. 3 tables over, Mike Doc Wilson, once a combat medic, now a man who still looked out for his own, was deep in conversation with 2 other drivers. None of them were here by accident. Beth leaned in as she refilled Marcus's cup. "Friends of yours?" He gave her a small smile. "Let's just say we share some common interests, particularly in keeping places like this safe." The bell over the door chimed. Sheriff Tom Cooper stepped in, his expression serious. He wasn't old, early 40s, maybe, but the job had added years to his face. He walked straight to Marcus, settling onto the stool beside him. "Heard we had some unwelcome visitors last night," the sheriff said, nodding his thanks as Beth poured him a cup of coffee. Marcus turned slightly. "Road wolves. 2 of them, for now. But there'll be more." "Yeah, I know about them," the sheriff muttered. "They've been moving up from Texas, taking over truck stops, using them as distribution points for their drug operation. Had 3 stops shut down in the last month alone due to drug activity." Marcus gave a small nod. "Figured as much. Their patch design includes cartel symbols. Ones I recognized from my time in Force Recon." The sheriff's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Force Recon?" He let out a short breath, shaking his head. "All this time, I thought you were just another trucker." Marcus just sipped his coffee. The sheriff looked around, taking in the crowd of truckers, the ones who'd come in early, the ones who weren't just here for breakfast. "You planning something, Marcus?" Marcus finally looked at him, his expression calm. "Just making sure," he said, "that when they come back, we're ready." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Still am. But before that, spent some time with Joint Task Force North working counter-narcotics operations. Saw groups like the Road Wolves turn quiet communities into war zones. And now, they're here." Sheriff Cooper sighed, rubbing his jaw. "Marcus, I've got 2 deputies. Total. If they come in force." "They will," Marcus interrupted. "But they won't expect what's waiting for them." Telling and preparing this story took a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The conversation stopped as the deep rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot. Not 2 this time. 6. Their chrome gleamed under the morning sun as they lined up outside the diner. Hammer led the pack, Snake close behind. The other 4 were new faces, each one wearing the Road Wolves colors. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The regulars tensed. But the truckers Marcus had called in? They stayed calm. Big Steve casually adjusted his position, giving himself a clear line to the door. Doc Wilson stretched, slow and deliberate, creating space around his table. The bikers entered as a group, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Hammer's eyes flicked around, taking in the unexpected crowd. He hadn't expected this many people this early. Well, he sneered, spotting Marcus. "Look who's still here." His confidence wavered slightly as he noticed Sheriff Cooper sitting nearby. But he pressed on. "Brought some friends this time," Hammer said, voice slick with false charm. "Thought we should continue our conversation about the new management situation." Marcus turned on his stool, unhurried. "Nothing's changed since last night," he said. "This isn't your territory. And it's not going to be." One of the new bikers, a hulking man with a shaved head, stepped forward. "You don't get to make that call, old man." Hammer didn't even look at him. Stand down, Brick. But he was watching the room now, really watching. Something about the trucker's quiet confidence had put him on edge. We're just here to talk business, Hammer said, voice measured. No, Marcus replied. You're here to set up a drug distribution point. Same pattern you've used at other stops down south. Intimidation first, then takeover. Use the business as a front. Start pushing product. Snake's hand drifted toward his jacket. Before he could move, Big Steve's voice cut through the air. I wouldn't, he said casually. Not unless you want to find out how many combat veterans are in this room right now. Hammer's eyes darted around, really seeing the truckers for the first time. The way they carried themselves. The stillness. The discipline. These weren't just drivers. These were men trained for war. You think bringing in a few old-timers changes anything? Hammer's voice carried less conviction now. Marcus stood, slow and steady. All eyes followed his movement. Let me be clear, he said. I know your operation. I know your supply lines. I spent 20 years tracking and shutting down organizations like yours. You're not the first to try this. And you won't be the last. But right here, right now, you have a choice. Hammer's hand twitched near his vest. And what choice is that? Leave, Marcus said. Find somewhere else to peddle your drugs. Because if you push this, if you really want to make Crossroads your battleground, you're not just taking on me or the people in this room. You're taking on an entire community of veterans who have spent their lives dealing with threats a hell of a lot bigger than you. Silence. Even the regular customers held their breath, watching the standoff unfold. Sheriff Cooper remained seated, but his hand rested casually near his holster. Brick took another step forward. Hammer grabbed his arm. Something in Marcus's voice, or maybe in the unwavering way the truckers watched them, had given him pause. This is your territory, huh? Hammer scoffed, but there was hesitation beneath it. No, Marcus said. It's everyone's territory. That's what you don't understand. We're not claiming it. We're protecting it. Snake spat on the floor. Big words from an old man. Not words, Marcus said, his voice even. A promise. You want to test us? Go ahead. But remember, whatever happens next, you chose it. Hammer studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze flicked around the room once more, taking in the truckers, the sheriff, the sheer numbers stacked against him. The odds had shifted. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Let's go, he muttered, turning toward the door. One by one, the road wolves filed out. Before stepping outside, Hammer paused, glancing back at Marcus. This isn't over, he warned. Marcus held his gaze, steady as ever. Yes, he said quietly. It is. You just don't know it yet. The roar of motorcycles filled the air as the road wolves sped away. Inside, the tension slowly drained from the room. Beth let out the breath she'd been holding. Jenny managed a shaky smile. Sheriff Cooper stood, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. They'll be back, he said. With more numbers next time. Marcus nodded, returning to his coffee. I know. He took a slow sip. That's what I'm counting on. To show them exactly what happens when they target the wrong veteran at the wrong truck stop. The morning sun climbed higher as the regular customers slowly returned to their meals. But something had changed at Crossroads. A line had been drawn. And on one side stood a community, united, prepared, led by a quiet veteran who had decided that some battles were worth fighting all over again. The afternoon sun bore down on Crossroads truck stop as Marcus sat with Sheriff Cooper and a growing group of truckers. In the far corner of the diner, Beth had closed off a section, giving them privacy to plan. Big Steve spread out a map of the local highways, marking known road wolf sightings with red dots. They've hit every major stop from Houston up through Oklahoma City, Steve explained, his thick fingers tracing the pattern. Always the same method: intimidation, then takeover. Then the drugs start flowing. Doc Wilson leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. According to my contacts, they've got at least 30 full members, maybe more prospects. They're not just some random gang. They're organized. Marcus nodded, studying the map. They use truck stops as distribution hubs. Truckers on their payroll pick up shipments, move them across state lines. The stops give them cover, a legitimate business front. And we're right in the middle of their planned expansion, Sheriff Cooper added, tapping their location on the map. Perfect spot to control distribution along 3 major highways. Jenny approached with fresh coffee, hesitating slightly before speaking. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you should know. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. 2 guys on bikes have been circling the lot for the past hour. No road wolves patches, no colors, but they're watching. Marcus exchanged looks with Cooper. Scouts, they said at the same time. They're studying our patterns, Marcus continued. Trying to figure out when we're most vulnerable. Big Steve cracked his knuckles. Let's go show them what we think about spies. Marcus shook his head. Let them watch. Let them think they're gathering good intel. Then he turned to Cooper. Tom, how many of your former deputies would be willing to come back for temporary duty? Cooper straightened. Most of them, I'd guess. Budget cuts forced us to downsize, but they're still loyal. Why? Because we're going to need eyes everywhere, not just here, but along all their likely approach routes. Marcus pointed to several spots on the map. Next time, they won't just show up looking to scare us. They'll come in force. We need to be ready. A new voice joined the conversation. Maybe I can help with that. Everyone turned to see Carl Martinez, a local mechanic and truck stop regular, approaching the table. I served with the Army Corps of Engineers, he said. Got some ideas about controlling access to the lot, if you're interested. Marcus gestured for him to sit. We're interested in everything right now. More people began drifting over. A retired schoolteacher who had served in military intelligence. A young waitress whose brother was currently deployed overseas. A local farmer who had been in the National Guard. Each one brought something to the table: information, skills, resources. Beth watched from behind the counter, amazed. Just 24 hours ago, her quiet truck stop had felt helpless. Now, it looked like a full-fledged command center. She caught Marcus's eye. He gave her a small nod. Determination had replaced the fear in her expression. As the afternoon wore on, plans were made. Roles assigned. Marcus kept one eye on the window, watching as the scouts continued their slow, deliberate circles around the lot. Let them look, he thought. Let them think they're seeing everything. But they weren't. Near sunset, Jenny rushed in from the back. They're back, she said, breathless. Hammer and Snake. They've got about 10 bikes with them this time. Marcus stood, calm as ever. Everybody remember what we discussed. No one acts alone. No one takes unnecessary risks. Outside, the roar of motorcycles grew louder. This time, it wasn't just about intimidation. This was escalation. The bikers pulled into the lot, surrounding the building, their increased numbers sending a clear message. We own this place now. Inside, the truckers remained exactly where they were. Unshaken. Hammer entered with Snake and 2 others, leaving the rest to circle outside like vultures. His eyes swept the room, landing on Marcus. Nice little war council you got going here, he sneered. Planning something special for us? Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between the bikers and the gathered truckers. Just having coffee with friends, he said. You should try it sometime. Snake scowled. Having friends? He spat the word like it was an insult. Hammer lifted a hand to stop him, his expression unreadable. You know, Hammer said, taking a slow step forward, I've been asking around about you, Marcus Davidson. Force Recon. Counter narcotics operations. Distinguished Service Cross recipient. Quite a resume. Marcus didn't react. Then you already know what happens next. Hammer's smile faded. What happens, he said, his voice harder now, is you back off. This isn't the military, and you're not in charge here. This is business. No, Marcus corrected him. This is community. Something you wouldn't understand. Hammer's eyes narrowed. Community won't stop what's coming. Marcus didn't blink. You're right, he said. He turned his head slightly, just enough to signal the room. Big Steve leaned back in his chair. Doc Wilson folded his arms. Every trucker in the diner slowly fixed their gaze on the bikers. The kind of look men gave when they weren't wondering what would happen next. They already knew. Hammer noticed it, too. The rigid stillness in the room. The unmistakable discipline in the way they sat. It hit him all at once. This wasn't just a group of truckers. It was a unit. Marcus took one step closer. You're right, he repeated. Community won't stop what's coming. Then he let the words settle. But we will. The wrong truck stop. The road wolves thought they were expanding their empire. Another town. Another business. Another easy takeover. They had done it dozens of times before, roll in, intimidate the owner, make an example of anyone who resisted. Within days, they'd be running protection, dealing drugs, and using the truck stop as just another hub in their growing network. But this time, they picked the wrong target. Marcus Davidson had seen men like them before. He'd spent 20 years hunting them down across 3 continents as part of Force Recon. He wasn't just some trucker passing through, he was a strategist, a fighter, and most importantly, a man who refused to back down. When the road wolves swaggered into Crossroads truck stop, they expected the usual response, fear. What they got instead was a man who didn't flinch. At first, they tested the waters. A few veiled threats. A little muscle flexing. A promise that accidents could happen if the owners didn't cooperate. But Marcus didn't bite. He met their stares, unmoved, unreadable. The bikers left, but they weren't done. They came back in greater numbers. More bikes. More intimidation. They spread fear through the town, sending their message loud and clear. Crossroads belonged to them now. Or so they thought. A battle begins. Marcus saw what was coming before anyone else did. He had watched gangs like this operate before, always following the same playbook: start with intimidation, then cut off resources, isolate the target, and when fear had done most of the work, move in with force. So instead of running, he prepared. The truck stop wasn't just a business. It was a lifeline for truckers, a place where veterans, law enforcement, and locals gathered. Marcus knew this wasn't just his fight. It was theirs too. He made calls. Old friends, brothers in arms, truckers who had served, lawmen who still believed in protecting their own. One by one, they arrived, not with weapons, but with a plan. When the road wolves returned, expecting an easy conquest, they found something they had never faced before: an organized resistance. Marcus let them think they were in control. He let them believe the town was scared, that the truck stop was on the edge of surrender. He let them come closer, until they were exactly where he needed them to be. And then came Ramirez. The man behind it all. Diego Ramirez wasn't just another gang leader. He was cartel. A man who didn't ask twice, who owned police, politicians, and entire towns. He didn't make threats, he made examples. When he arrived at Crossroads, he wasn't worried. He had crushed resistance before. He owned men like Marcus. So first, he made an offer, millions, untraceable, to step aside. Marcus didn't even blink. Then came the threats: families, friends, homes, lives. Still, Marcus stood firm. Ramirez smiled, believing it was over. He had played this game before. He thought he knew the ending. But this wasn't just about one veteran. This was about a community that refused to kneel. The lights came on. At midnight, the road wolves launched their final assault. 30 bikers. Armed. Ready. They expected resistance, but not what they walked into. As they stepped inside, the lights blazed from hidden positions. Federal agents. Tactical teams. Helicopters. Everything the gang had done, the bribes, the threats, the intimidation, had been recorded, tracked, and used against them. Marcus and his allies hadn't just fought back. They had set a trap. In a single night, the empire fell. The road wolves were arrested. Ramirez's cartel connections were exposed. Corrupt cops, politicians, and enforcers, every piece of his network crumbled. What had started as a fight for one truck stop had taken down an entire criminal operation. A new legacy. When the dust settled, Crossroads stood stronger than ever. The community had faced one of the most dangerous threats imaginable, and won. But it wasn't just about them anymore. Other towns saw what happened. Other communities started fighting back. Because in the end, it wasn't just about one veteran. It was about proving that when people stand together, even the most powerful criminals can fall. And it all started when two bikers picked the wrong truck stop.